What can you learn about running your construction business from someone who spent years with their hand stuck up a horse's ass? I got your attention now, huh? My guest today on Construction Genius is Dawn Bloomer, and she started her career as a vet and built a very successful veterinary practice, which was then purchased by another larger veterinary practice, and she became part of the deal team of that practice as they purchased other companies. And so Dawn is very, very acquainted with how to structure deals, the people who need to be involved in a deal when you're going out and acquiring businesses. And that's one part of the conversation in today's episode of Construction Genius. The other part of our conversation is all about removing you from the center of your business. And that's one of the deep challenges a lot of construction company owners have, even with companies that are extremely large, is that they are at the center of their business. And if they weren't there, their company would collapse. And at some point, you're going to be removed from the center of your business. And if you are at the center of your business, it's likely that the quality of your life is suffering and the value of your company is not where it could be if you removed yourself, spent more time working on your business, developing other people so that your business could run more effectively and profitably. So that's what we dive into today in my discussion with Dawn. And I hope you enjoy our conversation. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Dawn, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thanks so much for having me, Eric.
My pleasure. You started your career as a vet. What influenced you to become a vet?
Well, when I was 6, we lived in England and I learned how to ride ponies. And remember there was a little, what we'd call bay pony with a white face, and his name was Percy. And I just fell in love with Percy. And I decided right there and then that I was going to be a horse doctor when I grew up. And I spent the next 20-something years getting there.
Interesting. Where did you live in England?
Where? Oh, Sevenoaks, Kent. Yes, because you've lived in England, right? When you were growing up?
Yeah, I was born in England. So that's interesting. How long were you in it?
You were born there.
How long were you in England for?
3 years. So I did the whole English girls' school experience, and 3 years, ate the banana custard.
Oh,
it's funny the things you remember. Right?
Oh,
steak and banana custard.
For the record,
don't eat those anymore.
For the record, English public school, which means private school, food is the worst.
The worst, right? I mean, I still remember it. There's a lot of stuff I don't remember from back then, but I remember that. That left a mark.
Oh man, that banana custard! I tell you, dude, I went to a public school or a private school in England for about 4 years, and that is one of my deep memories. Is the dinner ladies and the garbage food. Oh man.
Right.
No,
I'm glad it wasn't just me because I'm really not that picky, but that stuff was bad. It was just bad. But banana custard I see anything that looks like banana custard and I'm just like.
That's interesting though, because, when you were 6, 6 is pretty young to be able to say, I want to be a horse doctor. I mean, when I was 6, I wanted to be, like a pop star or a soccer player, but I'm neither of those. So how did you how did you pursue that through your youth and your teen years? What kept you focused on that?
Actually, it's a good point because we also moved around quite a bit. So my dad was a banker, and every time he got promoted, we moved. And so I'm originally from Canada. Our first international move was to England. Then we moved back to Canada. Then we moved to New York for 5 years, and then back to Canada. So throughout all that, I think the horses for me were sort of the constant. Wherever we moved to, I got involved in riding there. And so I think for me, it's funny you say that because I never really thought about it. That's a great question, but really that probably was the constant. That was the one thing, because friends changed, back in those days, showing my age now, we didn't have email or instant messaging or anything
Yeah.
like that. So, and I wasn't much of a letter
Yeah.
writer, and long distance calls were
Yeah.
expensive. So staying in touch with friends was hard, but I think the horses were the constant for
That's
me.
pretty interesting. Your dad was a banker.
And I love being out. Yeah, my dad was a
What kind of
banker.
a banker?
He ended up running a retail bank, but he was an investment
Interesting.
banker
Yeah, my dad
throughout
was
his
a
career.
bank manager as well. So he was like an entrepreneurial bank
What?
manager in England for Barclays Bank.
No
Yep.
kidding. No kidding. Yeah, my dad worked for CIBC, a Canadian bank, but it took him all over the place. So he started as a teller. His dad was a branch
Yeah.
manager. And so my dad started as a teller and then, worked his way up after going back and going to college and getting his MBA and all that
That's
stuff.
classic.
But
That's classic.
isn't that
Yeah,
funny?
my
That is
dad did
classic.
exactly the
Yeah.
same thing. He started as a teller in a bank and worked his way up to being a bank manager.
That's really crazy. That is awesome.
So you
A lot of parents.
tell us a little bit more then about getting into becoming a vet. You always focused on horses.
I did. There was a time during vet school where I thought for a hot minute that maybe I wanted to be a small animal surgeon because it was kind of
Mm-hmm.
sexier. The small animal surgeons got to wear the white coats, and they seemed a lot more important than those of us who were spending half of our time with our arm up a horse's rear end. Um, so it did have some appeal, and then the little ladies bringing Fluffy in. I'm obviously exaggerating, but not entirely. Bringing little Fluffy in, and you could be the hero. And so I did consider for a brief moment switching and going into something like that. But no, I always knew that I wanted to do look after horses. That was sort of my thing, and so we're definitely in a minority. A lot less people go into equine medicine for a variety of reasons. First of all, it's very physically demanding. The hours are like constant. There is no, oh, well, it's the weekend. There's an emergency clinic. Most of us didn't have that luxury. So it was a tough path, but it's what I always wanted to do. So I went after it full on.
What's the one thing that people get wrong about horses the most?
Well, I think that first of all, some people think they're big and strong and really almost scary, and they can be. You have to learn how to work around them. But as big and strong as they are, they're actually very fragile. It's amazing. Like compared to cows. Cows, you can pretty much do anything to a cow, and like they get something stuck in them and they create an abscess and kind of wall it off. A horse gets something stuck in them and they get an infection and they'll try to die. Like it's crazy the things that it doesn't take much to tip the bucket for a horse. And so I think it's a really interesting. It's interesting that they look so big and strong, and they are, but they're also really delicate. I mean, you think about it, they've got like 1,000-pound body on those little
Yeah, yeah,
spindly
yeah,
little
yeah.
legs, and then they run around on it. It doesn't even seem right.
So you worked with race horses, is that correct?
I did. I had like a niche within a niche. I worked just with racehorses, just thoroughbred racehorses,
How did you
pretty
get
much.
specifically into thoroughbred racehorses?
When I lived in Canada and I was applying to vet school, I went and did an intern. Well, I would say actually it was more of like an externship because I wasn't a vet at the time. I went and worked with a veterinarian at the racetrack, and then it was so much fun. We got to go to one place. Mostly we weren't driving around to places all day, different places all day. So we got to see a lot and do a lot. And there was just something about the athleticism and the challenge of helping them get fit enough to perform at a high level without having anything happen to them. That whole thing about, the
Yeah.
spindly little legs and the 1,000 pounds running around a little oval. It was fun. And, the people that worked there are really down to earth. People that spend their whole time looking after horses are, for the most part, pretty wholesome people. They mostly do it because they love it. It certainly isn't for the money because most of them are not making a lot of money. And so I just felt like I was kind of in my element. I got to do all the stuff I wanted to do, and I got to do it with people who seemed to really care about the well-being of the horse. It sounds a little corny, but the people were cool. And so I really enjoyed it.
So did you build a business as a vet?
I was fortunate enough that when I came into the practice that I ended up buying into, it was already a well-established practice. And so I didn't have to do the start from scratch thing. Um, so what I did is I bought into a three owner practice. I became the fourth. I became a quarter partner, like the one, I guess I was the one woman in the four-man group. And then from there we had a partner that went out on disability, and then we had another one who decided he wanted to semi-retire. And then we started thinking about, well, what do we do now? Because we found that there's a new generation of veterinarians who are, even if they want to buy into a practice, struggle because they have such high student debt.
Hmm.
And so
Interesting. So what I just want to make one note, because you said something earlier that's really important. You had that externship or that internship, and I know contractors do those all the time with their people. Well, they offer them all the
yep.
time, and it's interesting how that one externship kind of hooked you.
It
Yeah.
did. It did. And it's one of the reasons why any young person I'm talking to in any field who's looking for some, sage piece of wisdom, for me, it's go and have those experiences. And for employers, offer them as early as you
Yeah.
can, earlier than you think might be prudent, because it's amazing how it can either help someone rule in or rule out that as a possibility. And it can change, like it literally can change the trajectory of your life and your
Yeah,
career.
it's interesting. My son just graduated from high school, my first son, and he spent the summer in an internship with an electrical contractor, working in their prefab shop. So
Cool.
that was totally cool for him.
That's really cool. I mean, those are the kind of experiences that's why I think that mentorship and internships, all those things, those are the things that can really, I mean, if you want to talk about paying it forward, those are the things that can really help keep things going.
As you were a vet, then did you do those internships with other aspiring veterinarians?
Yes. I often had students come and ride with me. I also spent some time going and talking to some students, and then staying in touch with them and trying to be a resource for them. It's one of those things that, because there were so many people along the way that did that
Yeah,
for me, that if they hadn't, I would never have ended up where I
right.
was. I feel really strongly about trying to give that
That's
back.
tremendous. Yeah.
You know,
So how did you transition from being a vet to what you're doing now?
our practice got to the point where we had two
Uh-huh.
partners, and we were trying to figure out what was next for our business and for us personally. And back in the mid 2000s, I had seen the writing on the wall. After '08, the economy started to get a little
Yeah.
tricky, and we had always done a really good job of making money, uh, and by just putting our heads down and working
Yeah.
harder, right? So we were not brilliant business people. Fortunately, the founding partner of our practice had set things up pretty well, and while business was good, we were quite
Hmm.
profitable. Um, it didn't take a lot of effort. But then as the economy started to change, we had some changes in our regulatory structure, and that changed, what we could do, and how much we could do in certain instances. And it really changed our top line. It was no longer a thing where we could just work harder, bill more, and make
Right.
more money. And what we came to realize is that as veterinarians, although we're really well trained in our profession, right, we never learned about business
Right.
in school. Nothing. So this was all stuff that we were figuring out as we went along. And I think we have, a little bit of ego and probably thought that we could
Yep.
figure it out. So I realized that that wasn't going to work for us anymore. What we were doing that had gotten us as far as we had was not going to work anymore. So I went back and got my MBA, and that helped. And then we were fortunate. We knew some people that were in this big group of practices, all different types of practices across the US. And they invited us to merge our practice in with theirs. And when we did that, they invited me to be part of the deal team. So we were out looking for other practices to acquire. And I loved it. It was really fun. And I realized that I really had a strong interest in that. At that point, I'd already been doing a lot more managerial stuff and, business related functions than I was doing practicing medicine. And so at that point, we grew this practice to a point, we actually did pretty well in COVID. And so mid COVID, we were approached and a much bigger aggregator acquired us. So at that point, they didn't need us doing the kind of things that we were doing because they had their own infrastructure. And so I decided that I just wasn't interested in continuing to practice medicine for a variety of reasons, mostly because I wasn't doing as much anymore anyway. And so I broke off and decided to move into consulting and use all the things that I'd done wrong and learned along the way to help other people.
Okay, so just so I'm clear here, you had a small practice that was then purchased by a larger practice, which was then purchased by an aggregator. Did I hear that correctly?
Basically, yeah. So I mean, we were small as far as people, about 10 or 12
Right.
people, but we sort of merged slashed were acquired by a medium-sized group, and then that was acquired by a larger
Okay.
group.
But that medium-sized group that you were involved in a deal team. Did I hear that correctly?
Yeah. So they invited me to be part of their deal team. So we were actively reaching out to practices and marketing to practices and trying to find right fit practices to join our group so we could
Okay,
grow.
let
And
me
it,
just interrupt you then.
okay. Yeah.
Let's talk about that deal team, because I know one of the ways that construction companies grow is by acquisition and they get acquired and all that kind of stuff. So why were you brought onto the deal team? Why did they say, "Hey, Dawn, we want you guys to join that. We want you to join that."
Great question. I think part of it was because during our transaction, when our practice was joining the group, I had expressed, I had expressed a lot of interest in the
Mm.
process, and I had been very involved in the process, and I had also um, I had also brought to light some challenges with the way the process was happening, and where there were some miscommunications about. They had a very proprietary way of bringing practices in. So the way that they were structuring their deals was different than the way a lot of people were doing them, and it was complicated. And what I found was that even though I thought I was pretty clear on what they were telling us and that I'd asked a lot of great questions, when we got to the other side of the transaction, I realized that there were a lot of things that were not how I had understood them to be. And so I was very proactive about wanting to be part of making sure that those communications were correct, because bringing the right people in, you don't want to bring in a business and then have them realize after the fact that things are not as they appeared, right? And not that there was nothing nefarious about it. It was just that our understanding and their understanding were not the same. It all worked out. But what I was excited about doing was being part of that process so that we could refine it and get better at it and make sure that the practices we were bringing in really understood what they were getting into. Because this is the thing, like, it sounds like you get, you get bought, you get sold. Every single deal is so different, right? And every type of transaction is different, but the players are different, and all that stuff is really important to how things turn out on the other side. The money, the deal, the dollars and cents of it all, to me, are the icing on the cake. The reality is, when you've built a business or you're building a business and you're trying to expand, you want to make sure that it doesn't go south because you made a bad choice or you didn't have all the information.
Okay.
So I think they asked me partly because I was super interested, and partly because I was very proactive about wanting to make it
So
better.
let's talk about this deal team just in a little more detail. Um, what are some general principles that you can take from your specific experience in the vet field? Some general experience principles when putting together a deal team and when going out to acquire other companies.
Ooh, that's a great question. I would say that first of all, you want to have, if it's possible, it's nice to have a team of people who have different skills and different approaches. And I say that because if everybody looks at the deal or the practices the same way and everybody has the same perspective, then oftentimes there's stuff that gets missed, or you end up with sort of a groupthink situation. It's really helpful when you can have people with different perspectives to bounce ideas off of. So let's say you find a business that you think is ideal. You're like, woo, I'm really excited about this. But you got so excited about it that you didn't notice that there was this, and this going on. And somebody else can pick up on that. I also think it's really important to stay in your lane. Like I like to bring in someone who's really good at crunching the numbers. I love looking at the numbers, the crunching them, the analyzing them, not really my cup of tea. So having people who are really good at the different parts of the deal, I think is really important.
Okay, so it's interesting because you have two things there. One is different perspectives, but the other one is then different skills. Am I hearing that?
Yes.
So
Yes.
when you're putting together a deal team, then um, I understand, someone who's good at crunching the numbers. What are some essential components for that team that are going to help to increase the success of any transactions you get into? Like, we've got the number cruncher. Who else do we need in that team?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, really, you need someone who is the financial person. It could be your
Mm-hmm.
CPA. You need a legal person, someone who knows not just the legalities of the deal, but of any regulatory concerns there might be. Someone who really has specific knowledge around the type of transaction that you're
Right.
getting into. Someone who is really familiar with the like the way the business is run and how that's going to integrate post acquisition with your business. Because one place where these things really fall apart is that post deal integration piece. It's something that's often, I mean, it's going to happen, but actually being really proactive about it. And it's something that needs to be managed, I believe, on both sides beforehand, because you have to have an understanding going into it of what to expect. Otherwise, it's sort of like getting slapped in the face. Oh, well, we've been doing it this way for 20 years. And now you're telling me that we can't do that? What does that mean? And sometimes you'd rather it was a deal breaker up front than have someone come in and you're jamming a square peg into a round
Yeah.
hole.
Is that where some of those communication issues came in that you were alluding to earlier?
Yes. I mean, to me, the communication piece is a big deal. So sugarcoating it, from my perspective, as a buyer or a seller, is not helpful. Being clear about what's really going to happen on the other side beforehand. I'm not saying make it sound terrible, but be honest about what the changes are. So you really need to spend time understanding how the business is run right now. If you're going to acquire a business, really understanding how it's run now and how that will be different when they become a part of your organization. And then being very clear in the communication, written, verbal. What happens, as you know, is you have a conversation and you kind of hear what
Yeah,
you
yeah.
want to
Yep.
hear, right? So I used to spend a lot of time, I sort of, in a number of our transactions, I became sort of a liaison where I would spend time talking to both sides, even though I was on one side, but making sure that they really understood and asking a lot of questions is sort of that like coaching thing. And I would ask a lot of questions to make sure they were very clear on what it was we were proposing it would look like on the other side.
That's interesting. So as we're putting this deal team together, you've got your financial person, your legal person, and then someone who understands how the integration is going to help or is going to work after the acquisition. But then someone like yourself who can be the liaison between the two
Yeah.
parties. And but it's interesting because if you're part of the deal team that's purchasing, then you have certain interests in mind, whereas the other party may have
Yeah.
other interests in mind. Is that right?
It's true. And that's where it gets a little
Mm-hmm.
tricky, right? So if you are on one side or the other and you're sort of filling that role, I mean, ideally you'd have someone that is a complete third party, but the reality is that's not very practical, right? So normally you're going to be on one side or the other in a role like mine, but it doesn't mean that you can't make an effort to be somewhat objective and make sure when it comes to something that's really going to change the outcome of the deal for both sides, I just think it behooves you to make sure that it's very clear that not even the expectations, but the agreements about how things are going to go are really clearly understood by both sides. And yes, is it hard to do it if you're representing one side? Sure, because I mean, you don't want to. I'm not saying that during the deal you're going to like spill your whole hand right at the beginning, but as you're working it out and really deciding, is this the right fit? It matters. The other thing that we didn't talk about, but another person who is really important in these types of deals is um, someone like an M&A advisor who can tell you, what's the current environment in the market? Are you really getting a good deal? Some people like to work with a broker. Some people like to work with an M&A banker. It kind of depends on what kind of transaction you're doing or what kind of exit you're looking for. But I think it does help. Certainly, we found in our group that it helped having someone who was almost like quarterbacking the thing, and and making sure everyone's talking the same language, everybody's got the same ideas, and that everything that's happening is lining up with that. Because that's the other thing is oftentimes we have great intentions, and it's not that anybody's trying to screw anybody, pardon the phrase, but it's just that they didn't check the right box, or the correct line didn't get written in the contract.
Hey, hope you're enjoying my conversation with Dawn. I know I am. And this is the point in the show where I'm going to remind you about my book, Construction Genius. Effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS. Leadership strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. Here's the deal. Go out to Amazon, purchase 10 copies of the paperback, and for less than $200, you can then shoot me an email and let me know that you've purchased those 10 copies, and I will come in and do an hour question and answers and problem-solving session with your executive leadership team. So I'll do question and answers based on the book, and then we'll do some problem solving. I'll actually teach you one of the things that I talk about in the book so that you can then use it to help solve problems in your business. I would normally charge $2,500 at least for an hour like that. And all you need to do is purchase 10 of the paperbacks, which is about $200. It's actually less than $200. And you can get me in for an hour with your team via Zoom. So that is a killer deal. Go out to Amazon right now, purchase yourself copies of this book. It's a great book. We have tons of 5-star reviews there on Amazon. You can read those reviews and enjoy the book. And now let's get back to my conversation with Dawn. Let me ask you this. Think about, if you can, you don't have an example, it's fine, but an example of where you were going down the path to an acquisition and everything was looking really good. And then all of a sudden something came up where you said, dude, this deal is off. We are not doing this deal.
Yeah, actually, that's happened. That does happen. I remember once when there was just everything looked good on paper. Like this is a common one, I think. Everything looked good on paper. The numbers looked good. And then we started, having more conversations with the actual people involved, and came to realize that they weren't really who they said they were as people. Like and the cultural fit wasn't there. So the numbers look great. They're making a lot of money. They run a pretty good ship, but their people were unhappy, and they were not nice people. And so at the end of the day, I mean, there may be an instance where you're okay being, bringing in a business with people who aren't nice people, but we didn't roll that way. We were very serious about cultural fit. So that's one where we would just shut it down.
And so did you, when you did these acquisitions, would you keep the former owners in place, or would you transition?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, almost always.
And why did you choose that? Why did you choose that rather than, okay, we've bought you, see you guys later?
Because frankly, in professional service companies and a lot of service companies, right, the owner ends up being the center of the business. And so that's one of the things that is really important to keep in mind. And so most of them would have, a contract to stay on for a period of time, at least long enough to transfer their goodwill to whomever they were leaving behind. There were some people who were ready to retire and they'd already done that part, and then they could just leave. But most of the time it involves someone staying on for a little bit longer to make sure that the transition went well, because not always is everyone below you excited about the change, right? And so it's important to have someone who is motivated to keep keep things going well and making sure that it still
It's
runs.
interesting because you use that phrase, the center of the business. And I know in construction, that's often the case, is even with extremely large companies, the reason why it's grown so large and is very successful is because of the guy or the gal who started the business, who's running the business. And so that's one of the big challenges that a lot of construction companies have, is that the owner is the center of the business. And your conviction is that one of the things owners need to get good at is removing themselves from the center of the business. Why is that? Why do you think? Because maybe I love being the center of the business. Why should I remove myself from that center?
So a couple of reasons. So first of all, whether you are thinking of, exiting your business now or, 10, 20 years from now, at some point you're going to leave either on purpose or by accident. Right? There are things that happen. There's death, disability, divorce. Like there are all these things that can happen to you that can involuntarily remove you from your business. So the challenge with you being at the center of your business is that everyone depends on you. And when you're not there, what happens? So that's number one. So number one is at some point you're going to leave. So it would be a lot better if you knew that your business was stable, whether you were there or not. Number two is just a quality of life issue. If you are the center of your business and you are always the most important person in the room or the most responsible person in the room, how do you take any time off? And like, I get it for some people. For me, for a long time, working 24/7, 6, 7 days a week was exciting and I loved it. But at some point, I started to realize that my values had shifted. And now what I really wanted to do was have more time to spend with my family and my kids and travel and, have some fun and adventure. And here I was making all this money, but I didn't have any time to spend it. And I didn't have any energy to spend it, like I was just the point where I was trashed all the time. So there's that piece of it too. The other thing is that if you are the center of your business will never be as valuable as it is if you're not. So I feel like there are so many good reasons to do it. The reason I think a lot of us don't do it when we're in the thick of it is because one, when you're in the center of your business, you're usually too busy to think about, how the hell do I not be in the center of it anymore? Like, all right. And then number two is it's scary to think that the business might be okay without you. I mean, it's like, oh, wait a minute. If it doesn't need me, then really, who am I? And and I really think that at the end of the day, that's the bigger problem is who am I if I am not the most important person in the room? And I'm not saying that we sit around thinking about it. I just think that it's kind of in here and it's hard to let go of. And I get it. I did it. Um, when I pivoted to a different career, it was like, okay, all right, now who am I? For all those years, from the time I was 6, I wanted to be a horse doctor. Now who am I? So that piece is hard, and it's not something that's comfortable to talk about, but it's important. It's
So right
important.
there, Don, I just want to make that note on that one phrase: "Who am I if I am not the most important person in the room?" And I think that's important for business owners to think about. And it isn't really, it doesn't have to do with necessarily finding your identity outside of your business, but it has to do with the health of your business. And this idea that you had at the end there, that if you're at the center of the business, your company is not as valuable as it could be, or as productive perhaps as it could be.
It's interesting because I talk a lot about delegating, but this piece really goes beyond just delegating. Delegating is the first step because it frees you up some bandwidth. And, we could talk about delegating for a whole hour, but because that's hard in and of itself. But it's really wrapping your mind around the idea that you can still be really valuable and important without being the center of the whole thing, without everything depending on
Okay,
you.
so but let's pursue this then. I'd like to talk about how you can remove yourself from the center, and you use the word delegating. So let's dive into it because I know this is a tremendously important aspect of what we're talking about. What do you mean by delegating? First, tell us what you mean by delegating.
Sure. So, delegating can have a lot of levels, but to me, the big thing about delegation, I think sometimes people set themselves up for failure with delegation because they're like, oh, well, I can get so and so to do this. And then, so they just tell so-and-so, go do this. And they don't give them the resources, they don't give them the training, and they delegate and abdicate responsibility. So, it's this idea that if you want to delegate well, ideally you want to find the right person for the thing. So first of all, what do you delegate, right? So I have a lot of conversations with business owners about behaving like an owner rather than an employee, because they spend a lot of time doing things that employees could do just because they think they can do them better or they can do them faster, right? That whole idea of, well, yeah, but I can just get it done and then it'll be done. Well, sure, yeah, and then you're doing 20 of those things, and and then you don't have any time to do any of the high level stuff. And it's one of the reasons why we don't spend enough time working on our business. We spend too much working in it. So when delegating, first of all, pick the right things to delegate. Really, anything that is not you adding value at your level should be done by somebody else.
Stop right there really quick.
Yeah.
Not adding value at your level. Tell me what you mean by that specifically.
Yeah. So when I think about it, I struggle a little bit with talking about, pay grade, if you will, because I feel like that sounds a little demeaning to the people in the lower pay grades. But really, at the end of the day, if you're not adding value in a way that only you can add value, then you should be letting someone else do that. Like, for example, when I was running our business, I used to spend a lot of time in QuickBooks, like adjusting transactions and, looking at reports. The problem was, at the end of the day, I was good at it, but it exhausted me because it wasn't fun for me. And then, we got a bookkeeper that was a level above the one we had, and I didn't have to, check everything she was doing. So she did all of that, and she was really good at it. And it freed me up all this time to just look at our forecast, look at our budget, and make decisions based on that. So I was paying her a lot less than what I could bill out doing my work, like by a lot. And it freed me up time to do even higher level work than what I was doing when I was billing. So my higher level work was strategy and, making new plans. So it's this idea that I want people to add value where they should be adding value.
So I understand where you're coming from. I think it's really important. One of the frameworks I use with my clients all the time is this idea of your aspirational hourly rate. And if you're the owner of a construction company, that hourly rate probably should be around $500 at least. And then what you can think about as you are going about your day is, how many of my tasks that I'm doing hit that aspirational hourly rate? And if it doesn't hit that rate, then I seriously need to think about delegating that.
I love that. I actually heard you talk about that on one of your episodes, and I was like, wow, that is a really good way of putting it. And I think that the other thing that does is, when you think of that really high hourly rate, you realize that if you are operating at that really high hourly rate, you shouldn't be needing to work as many hours either.
Yes.
Right? Like, the idea isn't to then figure out how you can jam more hours in the day at that hourly rate. The idea is to then just keep feeding the things that are not at your level to people below you, so that they can keep adding value and you can keep expanding.
I think one of the challenges that some owners have is that the tasks that are below their hourly rate, they actually enjoy doing.
Yes. And they're easy.
Yeah. And they feel productive as they're doing them.
Yes. Yes. It's almost like productive procrastination. You're procrastinating doing the stuff that's really important, but you're getting stuff done. So you're like, oh, look at me. I got all this stuff and I checked this whole list.
That's interesting.
But I catch myself doing that sometimes. It's like low hanging fruit. Ooh, I can do that. And then I'll feel like I did something, but I really didn't move the needle.
Yes.
I really didn't move the needle. So it's that idea of getting up to the point where you're looking at the 30,000 foot view of your business and your life and what you want out of it, rather than getting caught up in the weeds. And it's hard. It's hard because it involves a certain amount of trust in the people that you're delegating to. But if you get good at delegating and you get good at taking the time to, and for me, delegating is about really describing the outcome you want and less so the process. because you think about Dan Pink talks about motivation being people are more motivated when they have autonomy, mastery, and purpose, right? So if you can delegate in a way where you give them some autonomy over the way they do it, the task, and you can explain to them clearly the purpose of what they're doing, and then give them the resources so that they can get really good at it, the person you're delegating to is going to benefit as well.
So, what's the difference between delegation and abdication? You use that word.
Yeah, so to me, abdication is when you tell someone, do this, right? Do this, and then you never follow up with them. You never follow up with them to say, you know, do you have the right resources? Are you hitting any stumbling blocks? Maybe you've given something to someone that you always did, and now the people that normally would have been interacting with you are having to interact with somebody else, and that's making them upset. And so they're putting up roadblocks. So if you just tell them to do it and then you never follow up and you never check back in, then to me that's abdicating. That means that you just kind of said, you do this and I'm not involved anymore, and that's not good leadership.
I think another thing is sometimes leaders are really good at doing a particular task, but they don't understand why they're good at doing it. They just do it unconsciously.
So true. It's so true. And that's why sometimes it's hard for them to teach someone else how to do it too, is because they don't really know. They don't really know how they did it so well, or they've done it for so long, they can't explain the process. Not everybody is a teacher. I think I learned that the hard way along the way too. Not everyone is a teacher. Not everyone can explain what they do well. Um, and that's why I think often it's better just to give someone else the outcome that you want, give them some guidelines, and then let them figure out the best way that works for them, especially if you're just not that good at telling them why this way works for you. Plus, sometimes they have a better way. Often they have
that's
a
very
better
true.
way.
So how can someone who is a high performer, how can they overcome their reluctance to delegate because of their perfectionism?
Ah, yes, perfectionism. I've struggled with this a lot. I think coming from an industry where and not unlike construction, like the details matter. Like you actually have to do the thing well and right, or bad things can happen. It does make it really easy to get caught up in that perfectionism thing. But really, at the end of the day, is it is it good enough? I'm not saying that you should do a bad job, but is it good enough that the end user is happy with it? Because really that's the litmus test, right? So assuming the end user is your client or your customer, is it good enough that they're happy? Because me spending an extra 2 hours, messing with something to make it what I think is perfect probably doesn't make any difference at the end of the day to the person at the other end who's receiving
Okay,
it.
right there again is as another key principle is it good enough, and who decides what is good enough is the end
Yes.
user, is the customer. But then
Yeah.
that requires you again to sort of lay aside your ego a little bit.
Yes. Yes. It's the ego. The ego gets in the way again. Yeah. The ego's, I have to tell you that. So when I got into consulting, I thought, this was all going to be about, numbers and processes and systems and things. At the end of the day, 80% of it is mindset. It's changing the way you think about things. And that was one of the things that I think, I really enjoy it. And it was kind of surprising because a lot of the reasons that people don't do things in an efficient way or in an effective way is because they just can't wrap their mind around
Interesting.
it.
So tell us a little bit more about your business, Dawn, and what you're doing currently.
So right now I spend my time mostly helping people remove themselves from the center of their business so that they can have a more valuable business and now, not just in the future. I think I talk quite a bit about exit planning only because I think it's a really good vehicle for improving your business strategy. Because let's face it, a business that someone else would buy is probably a business you'd like to run, because the buyer wants a business that's well run, that doesn't require you to be at the middle of it. And so if you can work toward that goal, then you're helping yourself in the present and you're helping your future self at the
So
end of
who
the
is
day.
your ideal client?
It's interesting. So I have two pieces to that. My ideal client would be someone in the services industry. Professional services is where I've been focused, who is, is already successful in doing the thing, but can't figure out how to get out of their own way. They can't take a week off. They can't take a month off because they feel like everything would fall apart. They don't have a plan for the future. They don't know what's next. Or maybe they have some idea, but they have no idea how to get there. Those are the people that I really enjoy working with because they're invariably high achievers. They're action oriented, and they may not know what they want, but once they figure it out, they're prepared to take action. Because here's the thing: I can talk strategy and planning and all these things until I'm blue in the face, but without execution, none of it matters. It's all just a novel, right? If you can't step up and do the things that you need to do to make it happen, then it's pointless. So I love to work with people who are really interested in making things work better now and build value for the future.
So tell me, when you're working with one of your clients, what is your favorite question to ask them?
Oh, that's a great question. Actually, one of my favorite questions to ask them at the beginning is, what's their vision for themselves personally? Because we spend a lot of time focusing on our business. We spend a lot of time talking about what's good for the business. What do we need for the business? And at the end of the day, my belief is that the business should be supporting our life. Like we pour our hearts and souls and blood, sweat, and tears into our business. It should support the rest of our life. And so I feel like the first place to start is, what do you really want? Like what's in this for you? Because even when it comes to an exit strategy and valuing your business and all those things, if you don't have a plan for what's next, whether that's, even if it's in 10 years, if you don't have some sense of what your ultimate goal is, then it's not going to feel good. And that's why a huge number, I think it's about 75% of owners who sell their business regret it within a year afterward.
That's interesting. Why is that?
Because they didn't plan for what was next. So now they don't have their business, or they don't have their business, even if they're still working in it, it's not the same as it was. Their cash flow isn't the same. Even if they got a chunk of money in the bank, it feels different when you don't have that paycheck coming in and when you don't have control over, how much of the profits are flowing to you. So there's that piece of it. And then it's like, okay, well, what's next? For some people, it's easy. Some people are serial entrepreneurs. They're like, oh yeah, I can't wait to get rid of this one and move on to the next one. Or some people really are happy to retire and play golf. But a lot of people think they'd be happy retiring and sitting on a beach in Bali. And then 6 months later, they're like, oh my God, what am I doing?
That's interesting. So, how often do you find that people are unclear when you ask them that question about the vision for themselves?
Almost always.
Why do you think that
almost always? Because we don't take time to stop and think about it. We don't take time. We don't have time. Most of the time we don't have time, or we don't find time. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do even if I'm not working with them, is set aside an hour a week for thinking time. And when I say thinking time, I mean just thinking about the possibilities, not trying to solve problems. This is an hour dedicated to just, what are the possibilities? What could happen? And I had a mentor actually who had me do that late in my career. Wish I'd started it earlier. And at the time I said, I don't have time to eat lunch. I'm going to find time an hour to. I was really resistant. I was like, I can barely find time to go to the bathroom. How am I going to spend an hour thinking? Are you crazy? I think all the time. But he made me pick a time, and then he would call me at the end of the hour for like 15 minutes to make sure I did it, held me accountable. And I'll tell you, the better I got at it, the more it changed the game for me. Because otherwise, I don't know that I ever would have left. I probably would have just kept working until, working at what I was doing until I couldn't, because I wouldn't even have taken the time to think about what else I could do.
That's very good. That's a nice little takeaway there. Take an hour every week and just think about the future without any sort of specific agenda there. I like that a lot. So Dawn, tell us a little bit more. How can people get in touch with you?
Easy way is to go to my website, productivepressure.com. And I'm also on LinkedIn. And yeah, I try to check my LinkedIn fairly often, but all my contact info, social media for me is like, I got to tell you, it's a necessary evil. It's the things, the
Yeah, that's
things we
right.
do, the things we do for
Yeah, right.
business,
Yeah,
right?
right. Yeah, right.
I mean, if people could just find me magically, it would be terrific. But so far, I haven't figured that way. So, but my website has all my contact info and some blog articles and stuff, some more
That's
resources.
beautiful.
So, I I like to
Awesome,
share.
awesome.
So,
And a last question. I know you're down in Manhattan Beach there in California. Give us your one restaurant recommendation when we're in Los Angeles and we're, yeah, give us that
ooh.
one restaurant recommendation.
If I had to pick one, we have so many great restaurants, but if I had to pick one, I would say MB Post for their cheddar bacon
Oh,
biscuits.
magic words, cheddar and
Like,
bacon.
yeah, cheddar and bacon. I mean, to tell you, they're like this
Uh-huh.
big, and they're warm, and they serve them with like honey butter, and oh,
And
to
you
die
said
for.
NB Post?
M is in Mary. M is Manhattan
Oh, yeah.
Beach, like MB Manhattan Beach Post. I think it's where the post office used to be a
There we
long
go.
time
There
ago.
we go.
But
Yeah, we found it.
it's super yummy. Those biscuits. They even kept making them through COVID, so we could order them and pick them up.
That's
It was
awesome. We
great.
will put a link in the show notes to MB Post. That's awesome. Dawn, I really appreciate you joining us here on Construction Genius, and I do wish you the best.
Thanks, Eric. Same to you. Take care.
Hey, this is Eric. Before you bounce away, just want to thank you for listening to today's episode. Feel free to reach out to Dawn on her website. There are links in the show notes. Connect with her on LinkedIn as well. And quick reminder, if you like Construction Genius, I would appreciate it if you could give us a rating or a review, wherever you get your podcasts. The more reviews we get, the more the show is seen across the interwebs, and the more people can benefit from listening to these killer interviews. Thanks again, and I'm going to catch you on the next episode.